Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services Examination. The first article is with respect to the concept of NOTA and its importance in Indian election. The second article is with respect to the chemical disasters in India and the ways to handle them. The third article is related to the projected Cyclone Remal and the naming of tropical cyclones. The fourth article is related to the menace of microplastics and the ways to mitigate it. The fifth article is with respect to the international health regulations by the World Health Organization. Finally, we'll have a discussion about some of the very important topics for the upcoming prelims examination. So the first article is with respect to the option of none of the above in the Indian elections, that is NOTA. So what happened recently is that a motivational speaker, Shiv Khera, he petitioned into the Supreme Court and said that the Election Commission of India should treat the none of the above option as a fictional character. We'll look into what this concept of NOTA is all about, what is its importance, and we'll also see what can be the way forward. Now this concerns with respect to the GS2, elections and representation of people. Now see, we have a very important article in the Constitution of India, and that is Article 326. Now this says that the elections to the House of the People and to the state legislative assemblies shall be on the basis of adult suffrage. Right. What it means is that every individual who is a citizen of India and who is not less than 18 years of age and is otherwise not disqualified by the Constitution or any appropriate law made by the legislature shall be entitled to vote. Right. Now this makes the right to vote as a constitutional right. Right. Coming to this topic in particular, that is the none of the above options. See, what we see is that what is the importance of this none of the above option? See, this option, if you can see in the image, we have got the none of the above option in the EVM, electronic voting machine. Now this allows voter to register their discontent, that is their disapproval or their displeasure with respect to a particular candidate or a particular political party. If he is not satisfied with that candidate or a political party, he can press the NOTA button. Now, this provision was introduced in 2013. We look into it. Was there any provision before that? Yes. There was a similar option under the Rule 49O of the Conduct of Elections rule, which said that if a person wants to say that he does not want to sort of vote for any candidate, he should fill a form. He should fill a form at the polling station. But the point of concern was that this compromised the secrecy of that particular voter, right? So what happened in the year 2013 is that in the very famous case of People's Union of Civil Liberties versus the Union of India 2013 case, the Supreme Court recognized the right to negative voting. Negative voting. Right? If you are not really interested in any of the candidates, you should have the right to actually go for this NOTA option. Now, the Supreme Court then directed the Election Commission of India to include this option, NOTA, for the elections to the Lok Sabha and the state legislative assemblies. And it was in the year 2013 that was first implemented in 4 states: Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, and Mizoram, and also in the Union Territory of Delhi. Right. Now, point is, why is this NOTA important? What is the importance of NOTA? See, let's say I really don't like any of the candidates and I abstain from voting. Is it similar to, or is it equivalent to going there and casting sort of NOTA option? Yes, there's a difference. Abstaining from voting does not formally disapprove that particular candidate or the political party. So this NOTA option provides you the formal disapproval for that particular candidate or the political party. Next, it ensures that there is no misuse of votes. That is, there is no bogus voting. Bogus voting is not there, right? Now, where the NOTA is not applicable, see, what happened is, in the year 2014 and 15, the Election Commission of India, through its notification, said that the NOTA option would now be applicable to the Rajya Sabha elections. right? And this notification was formally struck down by the Supreme Court in the year 2018. What Supreme Court said was that the NOTA option shall be applicable to the elections which are held on the basis of adult suffrage. That is two types of election. The election to the House of the People, that is Lok Sabha, and the election to the state legislative assemblies, right? Only in these two elections, you will have the NOTA applicable. Now, what Supreme Court also said that it cannot be applied to indirect elections which are based on proportional representation. So I hope you must be aware of the types of proportional representations, the number of proportional representation systems we have in India, right? So we have got 4 types of elections in India where proportional representation takes place. The first is that of the presidential election. The second is that of the vice presidential election. The third is that of the Raj Sabha. Members of the Raj Sabha are elected through the proportional representation. And the fourth is with respect to the Legislative Council of States. So you must be aware that 1/3 of the members of the legislative councils, they are elected by the members of the Legislative Assembly. And there you have the system of proportional representation. So do remember this. Now, what are the arguments in favor of NOTA, right? See, what the civil society organization, Association for Democratic Reforms, says is that through the NOTA, what we see is there is enhanced voter participation or public participation. Why? Because it is ventilating sort of disapproval for that particular candidate or the political party. Next is that it gives importance to the voter as you are recognizing the right to reject, right, in a democracy. Third is that it discourages political parties from fielding tainted candidates. What it means is, let's say if the proportion of the NOTA votes is higher, then the political parties will have to introspect that are we fielding the right candidate or not. Then it sustains democracy in the country, right? Because you are placing the voter to a higher pedestal. You are giving him the right to reject. Then it also strengthens the right to privacy. I hope you all are aware that it was in the year 2017 and the famous K.S. Puttoswamy judgment that the Supreme Court of India declared the right to privacy as a fundamental right under Article 21, right to life and personal liberty. So how does it protects or strengthens the right to privacy? Because earlier, through the option of 49O, the rule 49O, it was also available, right? But you had to compromise your secrecy. But now the secrecy can be protected with the help of NOTA option. Now, what are the arguments against NOTA? Right. See, many critics have pointed out that it is a toothless tiger. What it means is that it has no implication on the final end result, right? Let's say there are total number of votes polled are 100. And in these 100 votes, 99 people voted for NOTA. And only one candidate was polled for a particular candidate, right? So what would happen is that candidate would be declared elected, right? That is what why we call it as a toothless tiger. Then it is of only symbolic significance. So you have this former Chief Election Commissioner of India, O.P. Rawat. He said that this is just of symbolic significance. Why? Because there are no legal penalties imposed on a person if he secures votes lesser than the NOTA. There are no legal penalties imposed. Then the parties remain unaffected, right? Why? They continue to field tainted candidates. There is a sort of use of muscle and money power in Indian elections, and that was also highlighted in the Vora Committee report. So do look into this Vora Committee and see what is the nexus between the politicians, the criminals, and the corporates. Now, what we also see is that in the reserved constituencies, that the constituencies reserved for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, there is the share of the NOTA votes has been higher. What it means is that the grievances of the tribals and the scheduled castes have not been adequately addressed, right? Now, if we go by the numbers, how has NOTA performed in the Lok Sabha polls? What we see is, as per the ADR, that is Association for Democratic Reforms, the NOTA votes polled were 1.08% and 1.06% respectively in the elections of 2014 and 19. Then what one more data says is that the NOTA has secured over 1.29 crore votes in the last 5 years. Now that is a substantial number, right? Now what we see is, what can we do to make NOTA more effective? So as we started the discussion, the motivational speaker has said, Shiv Khera, he has said that the Supreme Court should ideally should tell the Election Commission of India to consider the NOTA as a fictional character, right? So that it can establish guidelines for conducting re-elections where the NOTA has secured majority of the votes. Okay. Then some critics also say that the election must be declared null and void if maximum votes are polled for NOTA. Then some people say that the candidates who are losing to the NOTA should not get a chance, should be barred from the elections. Moreover, if someone is getting lesser votes than NOTA, then the election expenses should be recovered from that particular person, right? Then finally, there's a need to actually raise awareness about this right to negatively vote. People are not aware. So people need to be made aware of this NOTA option. Now, before we go to the next article, I want you to have a sort of a discussion on these questions. So the first question is with respect to the mains. So it says that in the context of elections in India, the NOTA is seen as an effective instrument to promote democratic participation. Critically analyze in 150 words. So do write an answer on this. Next, we have got a preliminary question which says, with reference to the Rajya Sabha elections, consider the following. The first is, NOTA option is available for these elections. It is not compulsory for a legislator to vote in these elections. Open ballot voting system is followed, right? So do answer this and post your answer in the comment section. Now the second article is with respect to a tragedy which has taken place in Dombivli, where 8 people have been killed and many have been injured due to a boiler blast. Now this is related to the chemical disasters, and we'll see why these chemical disasters take place and how we can mitigate them. This concerns with GS3 disaster management. Now talking about these industrial chemicals, what we need to keep in mind is that they form the core of the modern industrial systems, right? These industrial chemicals. And according to our data, they contribute to around 7% to the India's GDP, right? Now, these chemical catastrophes which have occurred in the last decades, they were relatively avoidable. And these catastrophes have led to halting of industrial growth and expansion. Moreover, it has caused significant loss when it comes to the human life, property, livelihoods, right? Now, if we go by the numbers, we have got the National Disaster Management Authority, which says that in the last decade alone, there have been 130 chemical disasters, and it has claimed life of more than 260 people, right? So it has also said that there are certain units, what the NDMA calls as the major accident hazard units, right? So it says that there are 1,861 major accident hazard units across the country in 301 districts. And in addition, we also have registered and hazardous factories which are below the criteria of MAH. And also we have got unorganized sectors. Now they all suffer from huge disaster risk, right? Now talking about these chemical disasters, what are the causes of these chemical disasters? The first is technical failures. What do we mean by that? See, there is inadequate, for example, ventilation system, right? There are no protocols with respect to different industries. They are just working on an informal basis, right? Then we have got human errors. For example, there is lack of knowledge and expertise, right? People are not given the PPE kits, right? The work is very tedious, monotonous. It leads to sort of a situation where the workers are not really interested in following the protocols. Then there are also issues related to hazardous waste processing, right? There are cases where the transportation of these hazardous waste is not carried on effectively. There is lack of proper storage and disposal facilities. Then we have got the induced effect of natural calamities. What it means is, let's say there's an industrial plant, and over there you have this sort of sudden earthquake, right? So it can lead to the breakage of industrial pipes or equipments, and it can lead to a leakage. Or you can have the situation of flooding, which might disrupt the industrial functioning. Then we can have a situation of terrorist attack or sabotage. What it means is that this involves a deliberate attempt to destroy a particular chemical industry so that there can be a leakage of harmful chemicals. Now, what have been the major chemical disasters in India? So if we talk about, the first is the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1984, right? So this resulted into the leakage of methyl isocyanate in the Union Carbide industry. right? It resulted into the death of thousands of people, and many of them were crippled permanently. Then we also have this tragedy which took place in Chasnala mining disaster, that is in Jharkhand. Now this tragedy took place in 1975. So over there in a mine, what happened was the methane CH4 was ignited, and it led to huge explosions, flooding, and the mine collapsed, and this resulted into the death of more than 700 people, right? Then the third incident is about the Korba chimney collapse. So in 2009, in the thermal power plant of Korba, you had a chimney which collapsed. It resulted into the death of more than 50 people, right? So these are the incidents which have taken place, and this could have been avoided, right? So what we will see is what is the legal and regulatory mechanism when it comes to the chemical disasters in India. The first is we have the Explosive Act, we have the Petroleum Act, we have the Factories Act, and we have the Insecticide Acts. See, understand, all these four acts, they have general and specific provision with respect to a particular industry. For example, the Insecticide Acts, or the Factories Act, or the Petroleum Act. Then you have the Environment Protection Act. Now this gives power to the union government to regulate, to set standards, to make measures in order to have sort of standards for the industries, so that the industries follow these standards in letter and spirit. Then we have got the Public Liability Insurance Act. Now this provides relief to the victims of disasters or accidents. Then we have got the National Green Tribunal Act of 2010. This provides for expeditious disposal of cases when it comes to environment protection and conservation. Then we have got the Disaster Management Act of 2005. Now this provides an overall framework when it comes to the management of disasters in the country, including the chemical disasters. Now, why are there in addition rules? So that it can reinforce the legal framework, right? So we have got the Manufacture, Storage, Import of Hazardous Chemicals rules of 1989. Then we have got the Chemical Accident rules in order to deal with sort of chemical disasters rapidly. Then we have got the Hazardous Waste rules, how the storage, how the sort of transportation have to be there for these hazardous waste. Then we have got the Gas Cylinder rules. Now, coming to the most important aspect, and that is the NDMA guidelines on the chemical disaster management. Now, this provides an overall direction to the union, to the departments, to the state governments, to frame proper disaster management plans for different disasters. Then it is based on proactive and participatory approach. That is, it involves a multi-sectoral approach, right? It employs a sort of multidisciplinary approach, right? Then we have got the National Action Plan on Chemical Industrial Disaster Management. Now this provides the overall framework with respect to the handling of these chemical disasters in India. It provides the roadmap for handling such disasters. Now, what should be the way forward for averting and mitigating such disasters? The first is the implementation and efficacy of laws. See, we already have a lot of rules and regulations and laws in place. Point is, these are not effectively followed. The implementation is lacking. So there needs to be a robust implementation. Then buffer zones around factories need to be there. What it means is, those industries which are producing harmful chemicals or materials should have a buffer zone so that the local population living around the industry can be protected. Then regular safety drills and training should be there so that it can have sort of rapid response. Then local population must be made aware. See, there have been incidents where the local people were not even aware of that such industries are handling such dangerous and harmful chemicals. So the local population need to be made aware. Then safety audits should be there. What it means is that audits should take place by autonomous institutions or bodies so that timely interventions can be made by such industries and penalties can be imposed. Then retrofitting industrial equipments. As I said, let's say you have got an earthquake at a particular place. So in order to protect those industrial equipments and pipes or storage systems, we need to have the retrofitting which needs to be there, right? So that the equipments can be protected and there is no leakage of chemicals or other harmful materials. So what we see is that there is a need to actually implement laws in their proper form and need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. And through all these suggestions, we can actually mitigate this menace of disasters, chemical disasters. So coming to the third article, we have a news from the Indian Meteorological Department, which has said that a cyclone would make a landfall in West Bengal and Bangladesh, and the projected name of the cyclone would be Cyclone Remal. Now this is with respect to GS1, salient features of Indian physical geography. Now before we talk about how the cyclone forms, we need to first talk about the tropical region. So the region between 30° north and south is known as the tropical region. Now this region receives a lot of insolation, right? Because of that insolation, there is higher warming of the tropical waters. Once the waters get warmed up, it leads to the evaporation of water, right? Water tends to evaporate. Once the water evaporates, it then leads to sort of condensation and forming the clouds, right? Now just imagine that if you have water which is evaporating, that would lead to a sort of a creation of low pressure system, right? Or a depression, right? And in order to compensate that depression, you will have winds from all the directions coming and compensating. Now, before we talk about the direction of a cyclone, let's first talk about the concept of Coriolis force. So we all know that the earth rotates from west to east direction, and because of this direction, you have a force which deflects the wind into a particular direction. So in the northern hemisphere, we have got the deflection towards the right. So the winds gets deflected towards the right. And in the southern hemisphere, you have got the deflection where the winds actually deflect towards the left because of the Coriolis force, right? So what happens is, just imagine now, you have a low pressure system over here, right? Now, let's say a wind is coming to compensate the low pressure system. So it would be deflected in the right direction. And here, when a wind would come, it would be deflected in this direction. Then you have got a sort of anti-clockwise direction, right? Coming to the southern hemisphere, we have got a wind. Let's say a wind is there, it's coming. You have the low pressure system here, and a wind is coming here towards the low pressure system. As soon as the wind would come to the low pressure system, it would be deflected towards left, right? And here the wind would be, if it comes here, it would be deflected towards this direction. So what we see is that it would lead to a sort of clockwise direction. So what we see is that the direction of cyclones in the northern hemisphere is that of anti-clockwise, and that of in the southern hemisphere is that of clockwise direction. Now see, what happens is, once you have these winds which come, now this low pressure system is also known as the eye of the cyclone. So this region in the center is the eye of the cyclone, which is characterized by clear skies and calm winds, right? Just outside this eye, we have got a system where you have got winds, high speed winds blowing in a particular direction, right? That is anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. Now, based on the speed of these winds, we have a particular scale known as the Saffir-Simpson scale. So what it says is that you have the category 1, in which the winds of the cyclone are between 119 and 153 km per hour. You categorize as in the category 1. So you have got different categories with respect to the damage it can incur. So you have got the minimal damage, then you have got the moderate damage, then you have got the extensive damage, extreme damage, and catastrophic. Now all these categories, they are different on the basis of the wind speed. Here the wind speed is increasing, right? And it leads to a situation where it can also lead to a catastrophic situation, right? Now if we talk about the various cyclones around the world, so they are actually called by different names. So if we talk about the area around the Australia and New Zealand, they are known as Willy Willies, these tropical cyclones. In the areas around Japan and China, they are known as typhoons. In the area in the Indian Ocean region, we have got these cyclones. Then we call them hurricanes in the area adjoining the Americas, right? So what we see is that these are the general names, but what about the specific name? For example, we saw that it is being projected, the name is being projected as Cyclone Remal. So how the naming takes place? See, understand, we have got 6 regional specialized meteorological centers around the world, right? So we have got 6 centers around the world, and they are responsible for issuing the advisory and naming a particular tropical cyclone, right? So we have got these 6, you can just see, 3 in the northern hemisphere and 3 in the southern hemisphere. We have got the North Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, which is actually the region is catered by United States. Then we have got the Central Pacific, It is also looked by the United States. Then you have got the Western Pacific, which is looked by the Japan Meteorological Agency. Then you have got the North Indian Ocean over here. And remember this, Indian Meteorological Department is one of the regional specialized monitoring centers of the World Meteorological Organization. Right. So in the southern hemisphere, you have got the Mauritius Meteorological Service. Then Australian region, you have got these services. Then we have got the Southern Pacific and South Atlantic. So as I said, the mandate of these regional specialized monitoring centers is to issue advisories and name a particular cyclone. Now, if we talk about the Indian Ocean in particular, see, we have got 13 countries, right? We have got 13 countries surrounding the Indian Ocean region, and these countries in the year 2020 agreed on a framework that all these three countries, each of these countries, 13 countries, would submit 13 names, right? So in total, we have got 169 names, right? So time and again, whenever a cyclone comes, there is a proper procedure which is followed and a list system is followed. What it means is that countries are arranged in alphabetical order. You can see Bangladesh, India, Iran, Maldives, Myanmar, Oman, Pakistan, right? Like this, 13 countries. And all these countries have contributed 13 names. Now, if you look into the names which are contributed by India, you can see Gati, Tej, Aag, Vyom, and all these names, right? So all countries have contributed. Why this is so? So that all countries can participate in the naming of that particular tropical cyclone, right? So in December 2023, we had a cyclone which was named as Michong. So you can just see in the list, here is Michong, right? So the next cyclone which is being projected is named as Remal, right? So on the basis of this list system, we have got the naming of tropical cyclone. So to summarize, what we can say is you have the World Meteorological Organization, and it has 6 regional specialized monitoring centers. IMD is one of the monitoring centers. 13 countries in the Indian Ocean region have contributed 13 names each. So in total, we have got 169 names. And then what happens is, following a list system, that is when countries are arranged in alphabetical order, as soon as a tropical cyclone occurs, we have got a name, and then it is being proposed the coming cyclone would be named as Cyclone Remal, and this is given by Oman, right? But there are some conditions which have to be followed. Now, what are the conditions? See, the naming of the cyclone should be politically and ideologically neutral in terms of beliefs, cultures, and gender. Then it should not offend any of the groups around the world. Then it cannot be more than 8 letters. Then should not be unpleasant or cruel in nature. Then should be short and easy to say. Cannot repeat names of tropical cyclone across North Indian Ocean. Then we have got can be rejected by member countries if the conditions are not met. Then finalized names may also be reviewed during the implementation if a member raises justifiable objections. So this is how we have got the naming of tropical cyclone in this particular region. So the next article is with respect to the menace of microplastics. So a recent study has shown that microplastics have been found in the Astamodi Lake, right? Now, this is a point of concern, and we look into what these microplastics are and how we can actually mitigate this menace of microplastics. Now, this concerns with GS3 environment. So, can you really imagine that tiny fragments of plastics have been found in the human blood? So, a recent research in Netherlands has come to the conclusion that tiny fragments of plastics of the size of 700 nanometers have been found in human blood. Then there also have been traces of these plastics in the deep interiors of the Arctic, which means that they can travel great distances. Now, if we talk about the definition of these microplastics, so what we see is that these are the plastics whose diameter is less than that of 5 millimeters. So any plastic whose diameter is lesser than 5 millimeters is termed as microplastics. Now, these are classified into 2 ways. The first is the primary microplastics. What it means is that they are directly released into the environment. For example, you have got microbeads in the personal care products. So you've got the shampoos and body conditioners. So they have got sort of microbeads in them. Now, they are made up of plastic products. These are nothing but microplastics. Then you have got the fragments of fibers from synthetic garments, right? So these fibers break down and they lead to the formation of these microplastics. Now, the second category is that of secondary microplastics. Whenever you have got the degradation of the primary plastics it results into the formation of sort of secondary microplastics. For example, let's say you have got a plastic bottle. Once it degrades into smaller fragments, that is nothing but secondary microplastics. Now, what is this menace of microplastics? So, if we go by the data of the IUCN, it says that around 8 million tons of plastics end up in the oceans every year, right? And also, according to the United Nations Environment Program, a study has found that in the last 4 decades, there has been a sort of exponential increase in the rate of accumulation of these plastics. So it is leading to a sort of marine debris, right? Then what is the impact on the marine ecosystem? See, once you have these marine organisms, once they ingest these plastics, it leads to gastrointestinal issues, right? There have been cases where bioaccumulation has taken place. Also, you have got the situation of biomagnification. What happens in biomagnification is that you have got a smaller organism, it is ingesting a sort of plastic, then a bigger organism consumes this, right? So the sort of plastic material in the bigger organisms, it continues to increase. That is what the biomagnification is all about, right? So we have got these issues related. Also, there have been studies which have shown that fishes are they're actually dying before they are reaching to the reproductive age, right? So this is a very serious issue. Next, what is the impact on human health? See, according to the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, it says this: on an average, a human consumes around 5 to 7 grams of plastics. So this is something which is a very serious issue. Then people who are consuming the seafood are at risk of having sort of issues, right? Issues with respect to health. Many of these plastics are carcinogenic, right? And there have been cases where it has led to sort of reduced immune response and also reduced brain functioning, right? Then the smaller children, they are susceptible to inhaling these microplastics, and it can lead to acute respiratory tract infections, right? So that is what the menace of these microplastics is all about. Then it can also have impact on ecosystem. See, these particles are very small, and what happens is that they bypass the filtration system, and it leads to sort of a situation where it becomes a part of food chain. And as I said, once it becomes a part of the food chain, it then joins the bioaccumulation, it bioaccumulates, and also biomagnification takes place, right? So these are the two concepts. Then studies have shown that there have been observable changes with respect to the growth and development and behavioral changes of these animals. For example, in whales, in turtles, in seabirds, it has shown observable changes, which is actually destroying their life, destroying their habitat. Now, what have been the initiatives which have been taken in the microplastics domain? See, we have got the Global Partnership on Marine Litter. Now, this was held in 2012 along the Rio lines, and this actually it made a commitment to reduce this marine pollution, especially with respect to the plastics. Then we had this Glow Litter partnership between the International Maritime Organization and Food and Agriculture Organization to reduce the pollution because of the fishing and the sort of shipping and fisheries. Then we have got the London Convention of 1972. Now this was for the prevention of the marine pollution with special reference to the plastics. What have been the India specific initiatives? See, India, we all know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he also said that we need to reduce the single-use plastics. Now this is a menace when it comes to especially the urban areas. We consume a lot of disposable bottled waters, and it leads to sort of menace of single-use plastics. Then we also have the plastic waste management rules, which focus upon the sort of collection, segregation, disposal of these waste. It also includes a very important provision of extended producer responsibility. What it means is that the producers are obligated to collect the waste and to process them. It is the responsibility of the producers of these waste. Now, what should be the way forward to reduce this menace of microplastics? See, the first is there needs to be greater investments in the technological domain so that we develop those technologies so that we can have, for example, photo or bio degradable technologies, right? So through these technologies, we can degrade these smaller particles and ultimately reduce them, right? Then new mechanisms needs to be developed. Next is international collaboration. Recently, there has been a treaty which the talks are going on right now. So there needs to be stringent regulation, binding targets on different countries, and learnings can be taken from Montreal Protocol. Montreal, one of the examples of the biggest success in the environment domain. So learnings can be taken from Montreal Protocol. Then see, it is not just the government which is responsible for cleaning and all that. The industries need to be an equal stakeholder. What it means is that they should invest on those products and services which utilize sustainable materials. For example, if you notice that the platforms like Swiggy, they have shifted to sort of having paper-based packaging material. So that is the kind of approach we need to have. The industry should come forward. Then at the individual level, see, there can be a lot of sort of resolutions. For example, we have the concept of zero waste trips, right? Then what we see is we should reduce our dependence on the disposables, on the bottled waters. Why? Because if we cumulatively work on these parameters, then we can have a very good result. Finally, there needs to be adequate investments when it comes to the recycling projects. That is, government can provide incentives in terms of financial incentives in terms of R&D. Then tax rebates can be provided. PPP, public-private partnerships, can be made in the recycling domain. So what we see is that a mix of approaches is needed. It is not like only the government or only the industry or only the individual. It is like that we all need to contribute in order to reduce this menace of microplastics. And then we can ensure that it does not harms the marine environment or the human population or the ecosystem in general. So the next article is with respect to the international health regulations. So the World Health Assembly would meet very soon, and then it would lead to the finalization of the international health regulations. We would see what these regulations are all about. They're very important, especially for the developing and the least developed countries. We will see why. Now, this is with respect to the GS2 health, social sector and government policies. Now, see, what are these international health regulation? Now, this serves as a global rule book when it comes to the public health emergency. In order to deal with the public health emergency, it serves as a rule book, right? Now, the World Health Organization, through its primary instrument, that is the World Health Assembly, it actually makes these international health regulations, right? Now, these were first adopted in the year 1969, and last time it was revised in 2005. Now, the focus of these rules of regulations is to maximize efforts when it comes to dealing with public health events, and then to minimize the disruptions with respect to the trade and travel. So when it comes to maximizing the efforts with respect to the management of the public health events and minimizing the disruption with respect to the travel and trade. Now, 196 state parties are there to the international health regulations, and overarching framework is drawn, which actually highlights, which defines the rights and obligations of these states, right, with respect to dealing with such public health emergencies. Now, what are the key features of these international health regulations? The first is that they are legally binding. All these 196 state parties, they have to follow these regulations. Then the core capacities, the focus of the international health regulation is on the core capacities. What do you mean by core capacities? See, every country should have certain capacity with it, right? Should have certain mechanism with it. For example, that of surveillance. For example, that of reporting of a disease. For example, that of laboratory. For example, that of public health emergency response, right? So these are the core capacities which the international health regulations delve upon. Then we have got the public health emergency of international concern, right? So it determines the criteria as to what health emergency can be designated as public health emergency of international concern. So these are the key features of international health regulations. Now, coming to the importance of these international health regulations. See, it was in the COVID-19 time that these regulations helped to the development of rapid global notification system, right? So different countries were informed about the COVID-19 expansion, right? The disease spread because of this IHRs. Then also, especially in the African continent, we see that the diseases like Ebola, all these tropical diseases, there is a proper coordinated response because of the international health regulations. So it has definitely played a very important role. Now, what are the challenges with respect to the international health regulation? See, the WHO as an organization, it lacks enforcement powers, right? So ultimately it is the WHO which is managing the international health regulations. So it itself does not have sort of any enforcement mechanism. Then there is uneven compliance by states. Some states comply, some states don't. Even though this is legally binding, there is sort of uneven compliance. Then there are resource constraints. Now this is at two levels. One is at the WHO level itself, that the WHO does not have the required capacity and funding. Then at the level of countries, especially the developing and the least developed countries. So the developing and the least developed countries, they don't have, as we talked about, this concept of core capacities. They don't have this core capacities to deal with sort of these crisis, public health emergency. Now, what can be the way forward when we talk about strengthening these international health regulations? So the first thing is that there needs to be a more collaborative and a unified framework for the formulation and for the implementation of these international health regulations. Countries should come together, have a consensus, come on board, and then a more robust framework can be created. Then proper funding of WHO is necessary. You must be aware that WHO, the primary funding of the WHO is that of donor funding, right? States should be obligated to fund to the WHO so that it can have its own autonomy, it can carry out its own task. Then the core capacities, as we discussed, should be developed, especially with respect to the developing and the least developed countries. Proper surveillance mechanism should be there, proper reporting standards should be there, proper laboratory mechanism should be there, right? Proper public health emergency response mechanism should be there. These are what the core capacities are. Next, we have got robust surveillance mechanisms along with stringent disclosure norms. You must have witnessed, you must have seen that during the COVID-19 crisis, China was reluctant to actually disclose the cause of the virus, origin of the virus. So a proper disclosure norm should be there, stringent disclosure norms. Then there needs to be continuous investment in the research and development so that proper vaccines, new vaccines can be developed, new medications can be developed, and then those can be supplied, especially to the least developed countries, especially in the African continent. So what we see is definitely the international health regulations are very important, but we need to strengthen them, and we can strengthen them through these measures. Now, coming to the prelims snippet section, the first article is with respect to the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act of 1994. So before this act came into prominence, we had a lot of cases where sex determination of the fetus used to take place, and that was because people used to abort the girl child, right? In order to restrict or curb this practice or to end this menace, we had this act of PCPNDT, that is Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act. So the objective of this act is to stop the female feticides and arrest the declining sex ratio. The act actually banned the prenatal sex determination. Now, it regulates the use of prenatal diagnostic techniques. What are these techniques? For example, ultrasonography. So we have got the ultrasound machines. So these machines cannot be used to determine the sex of the fetus, right? Now, they can only be used, these machines, these techniques of ultrasonography can only be used to detect genetic abnormalities. If you have a fetus which is suffering from genetic abnormalities, only then these sort of machines can be used for metabolic disorders and other abnormalities. Now, no person should communicate the sex of the fetus to the pregnant women or her relatives, right? And if anyone does so, then you can have a sort of a condition of imprisonment or a fine up to 10,000 rupees and imprisonment up to 3 years, right? So this is a very strict, stringent act, and because of this, the sex determination has almost stopped, and it has led to sort of arresting that decline in the sex ratio. Coming to the next article, we have got the Department of Military Affairs. Now, this becomes important because this is one of the very new departments in the Ministry of Defense. So, the Chief of Defense Staff, the CDS, is the ex officio secretary of the Department of Military Affairs. Now, this comes under the overall supervision of the Ministry of Defense. Now, point is that this department, it has both civilian as well as military officials, and it promotes sort of jointness in various areas. For example, procurement of defense supplies, then you have training and staffing, Then it also promotes the use of indigenous equipment by these services, the army, the navy and the air force. Then what it strives to do is to bring sort of optimal use of resources. How? That is by bringing about jointness in operation, including through establishment of joint or theater commands. Now this becomes very important, theater commands, right? So in order to have a proper mechanism to respond to the enemy, we have got the concept of theater commands. It also supervises the concept of territorial army, right? So this is what you need to know about Department of Military Affairs. Now, coming to the next topic, this becomes really important. Now, this concerns with respect to the critical minerals. First of all, what are critical minerals? See, we have got new and emerging technologies, right? Electric vehicles, we have got the semiconductor, we have the printed circuit boards, we have the battery manufacturing. All these sort of domains require specific minerals. For example, lithium, niobium, cobalt. So all these are critical minerals, and what we see is that the African continent has a lot of countries, and these countries are endowed with a lot of resources. So I want to make it clear, and recently, if I'm not wrong, in the year 2023, we had a question with respect to the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, right? Its resources, the cobalt resources. So this becomes really important. So if we talk about individual country, we can see that the Democratic Republic of Congo has 50% of the world's cobalt used in batteries. Then we have got the African Copper Belt, DRC and Zambia has 6% of the world's copper, which is used in many transition technologies. Then we have got Mozambique and Tanzania have 13% of the world's graphite used in batteries. Then we have got the Madagascar, the island of Madagascar. Now this has 15% of the world's ilmenite, a main source for titanium dioxide, right? So titanium is a very strong mineral, and this is sourced from ilmenite. Then we have got South Africa. It has 91% of the world's platinum. It has 46% of yttrium, 22% of manganese, 35% of the world's chromium, 16% of vanadium, right? Then you need to have a general idea about these. You need not to sort of memorize these specific percentage, but have a good idea about which countries has which resource. Then coming to Gabon, it has 4 to 15% of the world's manganese used in batteries. Then Guinea has 23% of the world's bauxite, which is used for aluminium, right? Then it has 31% of the world's rutile. Coming to Morocco, this country, we have got, it has 70% of the world's phosphate used in batteries. So this becomes really important, and as I said, a question has already come in the preliminary exam. Now, talking about a very important global institution, and that is the International Monetary Fund, right? So a basic about International Monetary Fund is really needed. It can be important for your prelims. Now, it is a major financial agency of the United Nations, and it is an international financial institutions which funded by 190 member countries. Now, what we need to keep in mind, what are the functions of IMF, right? Now, it works as, it is regarded as a global lender of last resorts. Whenever you have countries which face sort of balance of payment crisis, right? So it is the IMF which comes to their rescue, and IMF has really helped a lot of countries. However, there are some conditionalities which are attached to these loans, and these are known as structural readjustment. The IMF can ask those countries to liberalize the trade, to increase the privatization, liberalization, to have sort of lesser subsidy by the government. The government should spend less on the subsidies, right? It can lead to a situation where foreign direct investments are actually encouraged. So these are more or less in favor of trade liberalization. Then the special drawing rights is the sort of reserve currency of the International Monetary Fund. Now, the voting power in the IMF is based on the quota system. So as you have the countries having different quotas, on that basis they have their voting powers. Now, what is important is that the IMF publishes two very important reports, and keep this in mind. The first is the Global Financial Stability Report, and the second is the World Economic Outlook. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. Take care and all the best.